Hello again, everybody. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. This is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, pages 56 to 57 of Chapter 5, Advice from a Caterpillar. And last time we left off, the caterpillar was testing Alice's memory by asking her to repeat a poem. And these are the pages, are the poem, a story within a story. So these next two pages, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to lose it. I'm going to have a lot of fun with these. This is a story in a story. And he asked her to repeat, right? You are old Father William, which in those days was a famous poem, not perhaps really, really famous, but it was a well-known poem. And so Alice folded her hands and recited. So here we go. You are old, Father William, the young man said. Remember, this is a story in a story. You are old, Father William, the young man said, and your hair has become very white. And yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right? In my youth, Father William replied to his son, I feared it might injure the brain. But now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again, again and again. What doesn't he have? What is none? He doesn't have none. He doesn't have a brain. So the son is asking the Father William, why he stands on his head. And the father says, well, when he was young, he thought he'd injure his brain, but since he has no brain, he does it again and again. Very interesting. Next stanza. You are old, said the youth, as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat. And yet you turned a backward somersault, and at the door, pray, what is the reason of that? Now remember, Alice has her hands folded and is reciting this from memory. I don't know if you could memorize a poem like this. I think I memorized Richard Cory one time, but that's another story. In my youth, said the sage, as he shook his gray locks, I kept all my limbs very supple. By the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box, allow me to sell you a couple. What's going on here? Well, apparently the son says, why are you doing backward somersaults through the door? And the father says, well, I keep myself supple, right? And he keeps his flexibility with ointment. 1 shilling. What's a shilling? Well, it's a coin, the box, and he wants to sell his son a couple. Well, what does that mean? I don't know if you ever heard the term snake oil salesman. If you ever watch old westerns, there's some guy in a stage thing selling ointment that'll cure everything. There's a great movie called The Inspector General where they're selling ointment. So he's selling ointment, 1 shilling a box. It's a common practice by this. And in those days, sometimes it would contain opium, but we don't want to talk about that. In any case, he's supple. In the next stanza, you are old, said the youth, and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet. What's suet? It's the raw, hard fat of beef. And yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it? So in other words, he's got tough jaws, right? In my youth, said the father, I took to the law and argued each case with my wife. And the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life. So he would argue the cases with his wife, and he just had a jaw because he would talk all the time, and he would argue with his wife. This is a weird poem. You have to admit that, right? You are old, said the youth. One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever, and yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever? I've answered 3 questions, and that's enough, said the father. Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs. That's some ending, huh? She's reciting this from memory. This is a poem that the caterpillar asked her to recite. So who said the poem? Well, Alice did. What does this have to do with the story? Well, that's a question that you have to think about. This poem has something to do with the story, otherwise why it's in here. Remember I told you in the beginning, an author such as Lewis Carroll or somebody who writes classic literature like Alice's Adventures in Wonderland never puts anything in there without a reason. And I told you before, too, the more you know about the English language and the references and the allusions. So the first thing you have to understand is that when the caterpillar says, repeat, you are old Father William, you better Google that. You better Google, you are old Father William, and see what the heck that means, right? The old man's comfort. Actually, when you Google that, you'll find out that the name of the poem is The Old Man's Comforts and How He Gained Them by a guy named Robert Southey. Southey, S-O-U-T-H-Y. So what I did for you is I put it here on the left, which you're looking at now. This is the original poem. This is what she should have repeated. She should have repeated this poem, not the poem she made, whatever happened there, right? So let's just check this out for a minute. You are old, Father William, the young man cried. The few locks that are left, you are gray. And right there, we can stop and see suddenly there's a big difference. The old locks, I think when Ellis repeated it, he had a lot of hair left, whatever. A few locks left are gray. You are hale, Father William, a hearty old man. Now tell me the reason, I pray. In the days of my youth, Father William replied, I remembered that youth would fly fast, and abuse not my health and my vigor at first, that I never might need them at last. You are old, Father William, the young man cried, and pleasures with youth pass away. And yet you lament not the days that are gone. Now tell me the reasons, I pray. In other words, you're not feeling sorry and regretting anything. And Father William said, in the days of my youth, Father William replied, I remembered that youth could not last. I thought of the future, whatever I did, that I never might grieve for the past. You are old, Father William, the young man cried, and life must be hastening away. You are cheerful, and you love to converse upon death. Now tell me the reason, I pray. I'm a cheerful young man. I am cheerful, young man, Father William replied. Let the cause thy attention engage. In the days of my youth, I remembered my God, and he hath not forgotten my age. This is very different than what Alice talked about, but not so different. It has 3 stanzas, and when Alice repeats the 4th, and William says, "I'm going to kick you downstairs," I've told you enough. There are very, very similarities. There's similarities in both of these things, though they're very, very different. Would you agree with that? And that's important because if you didn't know this poem by Robert Southey, you wouldn't appreciate what Alice did to the poem. I hope you understand that, and I hope you realize that when you have this as a reference, as a basis of comparison, Alice is reciting that you are old Father William, and what she does to this original poem is not only funny, but it's very interesting because don't forget she's in Wonderland, and everything is different in Wonderland. She can't remember it, and yet she remembered all of this stuff, and it just came out wrong. Has that ever happened to you? You don't have to be in Wonderland for that to happen to you. Think about it. We're going to find out a little bit more about this poem in the next couple of pages. This is Jimmy. You're reading with Jimmy. My email is jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Send me an email, and I look forward to seeing you for the next analysis of Chapter 5, The Advice from a Caterpillar. Thank you very much.